I got connected with Major Tom Dooley's wartime journals about a decade ago. I was contacting him for the speech, the muster speech book that I've got coming out this year, that he delivered a speech in 1978. And so I was trying to get clearance on that and make sure I knew everything about that and how it worked. And I just happened to learn about these journals that he kept from World War II. There were 6 of them. And Tom had not shown them to anybody except family and friends, so nobody really knew about them. Well, it took about 3 years of talking to his family. Unfortunately, this was after Tom passed away in 2006. And they finally sent the journals to the archives at A&M. And I asked for permission to transcribe them. And it was one of the capping experiences of my life to start reading these journals. And when I realized what they were, I asked permission to transcribe them and to perhaps put a book together with them. And it took me the rest of the decade to do most of that. Tom Dooley retired as Chief of Staff of the Armored School in Fort Knox, Kentucky in 1969. These are the 6 journals. He started with the one on the upper left, used a little small pocket-sized one next, and those kind of carried out their completing the experience on Bataan and Corregidor, and everything from about the one with the red band on it to through the rest of them covers his prisoner of war period. Now, shortly after I got involved in this project, my wife, who does genealogy research, came across some newspaper series, one in 1945 that took Tom Dooley's journals, amplified them with more information from Tom Dooley, and ran a 22-part series in the newspaper. I have also transcribed that. A lot of people want to know in his journals what he said about POW camp and what it was like to be a prisoner of war. Well, most of the things that happened to him, he couldn't write down in his journals at that time, because if he was caught with those materials talking about what they had been doing to them, he and his fellow prisoners were subject to more harsh treatment. So much of this material got added in when they did the newspaper series in 1945. And I mention that because I have also transcribed that newspaper series, and I've got a list up here that you can sign and give me your email address. And anybody who wants it, I will be happy to send you the transcription of that newspaper series, because it's got a lot more information than even the book of his journal. The journal is primarily his day-to-day experiences as compared to the higher-ranking officers. Tom Dooley's journal talks about who he saw, where he went, what happened to him. It was not about logistics and strategy and all of this kind of stuff. It's very personal. And matter of fact, he even mentions one nurse, a woman named Juanita Redmond, 18 times in his journal. Juanita Redmond got out of Corregidor just at the beginning of the war in '42, just before the surrender. And she came back and wrote a book which was produced into a movie that Claudette Colbert starred in called So Proudly We Hail. And so this was just one of the people that he ran into on a day-to-day basis. And he apparently thought quite a bit of her, because he got her out of Bataan and into Corregidor for a while before the surrender was going to occur. And then from there she was able to catch a flight and get out of there. Tom Dooley grew up in McKinney, Texas, in this little house on Lamar Street. It doesn't look too much different, I understand, from the way it did when he was growing up. Tom was a pretty average guy in high school, well liked by everyone. He played tennis, he drove a milk wagon, he quarterbacked the football team, although he said he was a little bit small for that type of endeavor. From there, he went to Texas A&M and served on the Corps staff, was a member of the Ross Volunteers, head yell leader, and chosen one of the 5 best-liked seniors. This picture of the yell leaders, does anybody recognize the guy on the far left? That's Tom Dooley next to him.
Rick Perry?
No, Rick Perry's not quite that old. No, if you did any banking in Bryan, the guy on the left is Jocko Roberts. I'm sure many of you knew Jocko, but that was his fellow yell leader when he was a senior at A&M. This is Tom on the right here when he was chosen one of the 5 best-liked seniors in the class of 35. Just about everybody else there were very high-ranking people in the Corps at that time. Over the next 5 years, he became superintendent of the WPA, or Works Progress Administration, and also headed a Civilian Conservation Corps camp in Bonham. He did a year's tour with the 12th Cavalry, which is where he first met General Wainwright out in West Texas, and he worked for 2 oil exploration companies in South Texas. 1 year about after being reactivated with the 1st Cavalry Brigade in July of 1940, he was ordered to join the 26th Cavalry in the Philippines. He arrived by ship in Manila in May of 1941, and 4 months later was assigned as aide-de-camp to Major General Jonathan Wainwright. On November the 27th, the general was named commander of the North Luzon Force, and barely a week later, the Japanese attacked. Dooley's book describes the silver undersides of the Betty bombers that the Japanese used. This is an illustration that aviation artist Keith Ferris, A&M class of 50, did of another battle that went on a little farther north at that time. And another Keith Ferris picture shows one of the P-30 fighters above Clark Field on December the 8th, the day of the attack. So if you ever go to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, the big mural of the B-52 across one wall, that's Keith Ferris's work. So Ferris wanted to be a pilot. When he couldn't be a pilot, he became an aviation artist. A week after the attack started, Tom Dooley began his first of the 6 journals. And he recounted first the events of the previous 7 days, and then started a day-to-day recounting of what was happening to him. What he says up here is, my intentions are to keep some sort of running account of what goes on in this fracas. Not a diary, nor a memoranda, but a cross between the two. And then from there on, he describes the next 7 days of what was happening to them. Tucked into that first book was General Orders Number 5, which was dated December the 16th, 1941, just about 10 days after the attack started. Tom Dooley was in Manila at the time things started, and he got word that General Wainwright wanted him back at Fort Stotzenburg. Well, he was driving a Buick convertible at that time to get around the island, and he hopped in his car and took off. And when he got to Fort Stotzenburg, the general asked him, says, "Tom, did you drive by Clark Air Base when you came in?" Tom says, "Yeah." He says, "Man, they're bombing the heck out of that place. You could have been killed." The general marched into his office, filled out a form for a Silver Star, and this Silver Star, issued on December the 16th, could very possibly be the first one issued in World War II. I haven't been able to confirm that, but there were a lot of awards given in Hawaii, but I think a lot of those were kind of after the fact awarded. Tom got his within just over a week after the attack started. "10 days after the attack was Tom Dooley's 28th birthday. I felt a stronger connection to him when I read that, because that's about how old I was when I went overseas. And so I could relate a little bit to him. Well, his fellow aide, Johnny Pugh, had some 50-cent pieces that he had brought with him from the States. And so he gave Tom Dooley one of those 50-cent pieces as a kind of a birthday present. Well, the general thought, well, I need to do something for Tom. What can I do? And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out this commemorative coin from the 82nd Division reunions that he had had and gave it to Tom to keep. And Tom Dooley held onto that coin the rest of his life. As aide to General Wainwright, Tom Dooley traveled the length and breadth of the island of Luzon, the main northern island in the Philippines. And battles started up here. They came in from the Lingayen Gulf here at the top, and they worked their way down to try to pin everybody down in the Bataan Peninsula, right in this area. Corregidor is just off the shore right there at the mouth of Manila Bay. And right about in this area in the middle is where Clark Air Force Base and Fort Stotsenburg, where he was stationed, was located. Let's see. While I'm looking at this map, I want to point out that, right up in this area, right about here, is Baguio. The significance of this place is that after the war and after the surrender on the USS Missouri, they brought Tom Dooley, General Wainwright, and the other people from the Philippines command back here, and that's where they took the surrender of the Tiger of Malaysia that was in charge of the Philippines at that time. Tom Dooley was part of that ceremony. This gives you a little closer look at Corregidor. It looks pretty big here when you look at it, but it's a very small speck just south of the Bataan Peninsula. There's topside, which is the highest area on the island, and that's where most of the barracks and all were. One reference he makes is after they moved to Corregidor, he and his fellow aide went up to the topside, and their barracks was nothing more than splinters when they got there. Middle side is a little lower ground, and bottom side is where the Malenta Tunnel, which is where their headquarters were. It's a kind of a rock mountain right there in the middle of the island, and it was the headquarters. General MacArthur had his headquarters, and then when he left, General Wainwright moved into his place. General George Moore, who had been commandant at A&M, was in charge of all of the shore batteries on Corregidor and the adjacent islands around there. And General Moore was class of '08 at A&M. When he left to go, word is that he took something in the neighborhood of 25 or 30 Aggies with him. So by the time the war started, A&M already had a really outstanding presence in the Philippine Islands. Matter of fact, one of the books that the A&M Press has brought back here for you is John Adams' book on the Fighting Texas Aggie Defenders of Bataan and Corregidor. And John lists 89 Aggies that were there at the beginning of the war. And he does background information on just about all of them. So if you want to learn about those people, it's a companion volume to the Tom Dooley book. Down on this end of the island is Kenley Airstrip, and it's not a very big airstrip. Matter of fact, John Adams, did John make it today? I never have. There he is. He's hiding in the back. John has actually landed a plane on that. And he says it's got the worst crosswinds he ever saw, but he has actually been there. One thing I wanted to go back and show you here is right up in the middle of the island, about here just north of Clark Air Base, is a place called Tarlac. Well, after the surrender, they were kept for a while in the University Club at Manila University, and then when they were moved up to Tarlac and stayed there until they finally shipped them out, took them up to Formosa, then now Taiwan, and they stayed on the east side of Formosa until the war was starting to wind down, and because they were close to the shoreline over there, and they were scared to death that the Americans were going to come back and recapture all of these prisoners and liberate them. So they moved them from the east side of Formosa to the other side and more inland, and that's where they were until they finally were shipped out to Japan and Manchuria, where they were when the war ended. On February 1942, as the battle was raging, a Signal Corps photographer took this picture of General Wainwright and his staff. General Wainwright signed the picture to Tom Dooley from the Battling Bastards of Bataan, Wainwright, and he kept that picture with him until he got home. This gives you a little idea of what the Malenta Tunnel arrangement looked like. General Wainwright's headquarters were in this area right here, and that was where MacArthur also had his headquarters. The hospital was in this area over here. General Moore had his headquarters down here, and they had the officers' mess actually outside. They moved it inside the tunnel when the battling started. When the surrender came, they were brought from Corregidor back over to Bataan. And this is General Wainwright right here. John Pugh is over here off the edge of the picture here. This is Tom Dooley right here, and this is the General Homa that refused to take their surrender because he wanted General Wainwright to say kind of a confession, a lot of things that General Wainwright wasn't about to say. They actually told him they would wait on the surrender, and he put on his saber and took off to go lead another battle against troops who had largely laid down their arms 12 hours earlier. So they were not interested in doing it. They were looking more to wipe everybody out if they could. Anyway, they went back to Corregidor, and with Tom Dooley's help and Pugh, they finally convinced the general to negotiate with a colonel over there on the Corregidor and sign the surrender that saved a lot of lives. There were thousands of people on Corregidor by that time, and they would have all been wiped out if that surrender hadn't have been effected at that time. This gives you an idea of people being brought out of Malenta Tunnel after the surrender. Just a few weeks after their surrender, this picture ran in a Japanese newspaper. This is Tom Dooley, and this is Major Bill Lawrence. And Lawrence became the first Wainwright aide to die in captivity. He died of pneumonia, largely because of neglect and lack of treatment there. But this picture actually ran in the Japanese newspaper. Now, right here, I kind of skip over a little bit. I mean, he was 3.5 years a POW. And like I said, he didn't write a lot of detail in his journal. But I can send you that newspaper series if you want to read it. And I'll be happy to do that if y'all can sign this list up here and give me your email address. And it has a lot more detail. But I wanted to read you a few excerpts. How are we doing? Okay. In mid-1942, the newspaper series article relates the following. The slappings are in such periods that everyone is convinced that they are by orders of the officers. One time the sentry merely passes by. At other times he appears madder than hell and slaps 2 or 3 people. But the worst time for Dooley, who by striving not to give offense and keeping his mouth shut did not get slapped, was when his General Wainwright got it. The Jap sentries try to pick on the older and taller ones, he wrote, probably brought about by their inferiority complex. Then one day, tall, dignified, skinny Wainwright got it. A hard blow in the side of the face. Absolutely unjustified. No reason, no excuse. Just the sadisms of the Japs, these people who are not signatories to the Geneva Convention, but who say that they observe it. What manner of people are they? Another excerpt taken from about not quite a year later, in April 43, he writes, notice was received this morning, April the 1st, that all officers of Brigadier General or above will move tomorrow to another camp. That meant the separation for nearly 2 years of 2 men who had been together as chief and aide, not only through the high-nip tide of war, but back at Fort Clark in Del Rio. It was almost father and son, and neither knew if they would ever see each other again. In fact, the chances were against it. Tall, skinny Wainwright and his younger age shook hands in a long goodbye that might mean forever. The next day, Dooley wrote, sure hated to see the general go. It was a terrific understatement. But he added, feel it will be better for him. Dooley was also soon to leave Corinco. America was on the march, and the Japs did not want such officers recaptured. So on June 7th, he left the garden in which he had spent so many cold, hard hours. This was a garden, by the way, that the prisoners were forced to tend, but they never got any produce out of it. The produce was all put on the Japanese captors' table. He was moved over the Formosan Mountains and away from the vulnerable seacoast to Shirakawa, where he was put to work on another garden, one which, when mature, was fed to stock or allowed to rot as Americans starved. Let me send you this newspaper series because that's what you're going to find in it that is not in the book. But the reason I didn't do that in the book is I toyed with doing it, and then I got to thinking, no, I'd be duplicating what they did in the newspaper series, and it probably wouldn't be as good as the newspaper series. So we made a decision that the book that we did here was going to be Tom Dooleys Journal. The author of the book is Tom Dooley. It's not me. Everything in it, except for a few notes here and there that were amplifying or clarifying information, were his words. This is how Tom Dooley looked in August of 1945 in Manchuria. That was taken right about the time that he was released. And less than a month later, he was aboard the USS Missouri to watch the surrender signed with General Wainwright. After they got released, Tom Dooley found out he had an 18-month-old nephew that he'd never heard about. Well, when he told General Wainwright about it, General Wainwright says, you know, I need to give you something for this boy. What can I give you? Well, what he gave Tom was his Japanese canteen that helped him through those 3.5 years of POW camp. And this is Tom Dooley's canteen. which both of them are still in the possession of his family. And I hope those will be at the archives one day. In 1945, when there were still snipers around on Corregidor, these three guys went to Corregidor and had an Aggie muster. The guy on the left is Dick Conley. The guy back here is an air pilot named Tommy Martin. And this guy right here, all of you would recognize, is General Orman Simpson, who the drill field at A&M is named for today. But they were the only three people, other than combat troops, that were on the island trying to get rid of the snipers. But they went anyway. This is a picture of the Japanese surrender in the Philippines. And if you look right up here in the corner, that's Tom Dooley, right here in the background. And this is General Wainwright over here. Just like on the USS Missouri, one of the pens used in this signing was given to General Wainwright. The fellow right here signing the paper is General Edmund Levy. He's an Aggie, class of 15, who was the deputy commander of U.S. Army in the Western Pacific at the time. So they had pretty good Aggie representation there. The following year, they had the homecoming muster at Texas A&M. Speaker was General Dwight Eisenhower. This is in Kyle Field. The guy standing over here, Congressman Olin Teague. This is Tom Dooley standing on that stage. And this guy back here behind the general is Bill Becker, who became a major general in the Army. At the same time that was going on, a bunch of Aggies in the Pacific got together at Corregidor and had a recognition ceremony for the Aggies that were there in 1942 when they were being attacked. There's about 120 or so people there, and I would say 95% of them have all been identified. If you go on the Association of Former Students website and look under Traditions for muster, you will find this picture. And as you run your cursor over the picture, it'll pop up with a name and the hometown of the Aggie that was there. One of the Aggies that was there, many of you may know the name of Bill Jitterbug Henderson. For a long time, and maybe still, he was the most lettered athlete in Texas A&M history. The athletic dorm at A&M for many years was named for Bill Henderson. This is the 1978 muster here on campus when Tom Dooley came and explained how the muster was conducted. General Moore asked him to get the names of all of the Aggies that were there on Bataan or Corregidor. He came up with a list of 27 people. And he got one of the newspaper reporters there then to use his wire time and send a story back. Well, the story talks about how they toasted A&M in glasses of water and all this stuff. There wasn't any toasting going on. They were trying to stay out of the line of fire of the bombs and the shells. They were having shells fall on Corregidor at something like 1 every 5 seconds. And this went on for the better part of a couple of days. There's thousands and thousands of shells were dropped there. Tom explained all of this, and he explained that a muster is a roll call. And that's what they did. They had a roll call and sent it back. Part of the reason was to tell their families that they were still here and that they were here at this time. Part of it was to secure the Army insurance for those people who didn't come back. So it was a multifaceted program. By the way, the guy he's talking to here on the right, that's that year's head yell leader. So that's 2 head yell leaders from A&M comparing notes a little bit. And then I wanted to introduce you to the people that helped make this book possible. This is Tom Dooley's granddaughter, Kate. This is her father, Pete. And this is his sister, Randy Peters Dooley. These people took care of getting the journals sent down here and made them a part of A&M history forever. I still maintain contact with them, and when I went into the hospital just before Christmas and got a couple of stents put in, I got a note from her. She says Pete's had 10 of them, ranging from about 6 different operations. I have one big one on him though. My entire operation went through this little hole right here up my arm, and they never cut me anywhere else. I feel pretty good to be here and not having gone through that. That's really what I wanted to do today, is introduce Tom Dooley, the author of the book, to you. I don't know what else I can answer for you. One other thing I can mention is I have also transcribed General Wainwright's newspaper series of 45, along with additions that were put into the book, which was called My Story or The General Story. Some of those are still available on Amazon. And I'm trying to get these books reprinted, maybe at an on-demand printing deal or something that's not very expensive, because they shed so much light on what went on that I would have never been able to understand in doing the journal without those. So I've got those transcribed too, and another short newspaper series was done in 42. There was a guy named Lieutenant Tom Garrity who lost his plane early in the war, so he got attached to Wainwright's staff and was temporarily an extra aide for Wainwright. Well, he flew Tom Dooley to Corregidor in a little bi-wing airplane where they came, I think that was the one where they came about 10 feet from running into a shed that was loaded with dynamite. So it's an interesting story. It's a much shorter series because he wrote it in 42 for the Chicago Tribune, and it was 6 episodes in the newspaper. Tom Dooley's was 22 episodes, and General Wainwright's was 52. So I've got all of those if anybody's interested in digging more into them, but you really do need to read this Tom Dooley newspaper series to get what goes along with the book. Does anyone have any questions?